Hi everyone, my name is Madison Nieto, and I'm here to present over metaphors, an important tool to educators and students. And let's get started. I'm so happy that you guys are here to join me today and to see what I have been working on and researching. So, what is a metaphor? Well, a metaphor is a noun, and it's a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object or action to which it is not literally applicable. That's according to the Oxford Dictionary, and according to one of the studies I looked into called by Godor, metaphors are devices that people employ for both poetic purposes and rhetorical elaboration and belong to the realm of extraordinary language. So in similar terms, a metaphor is comparing something to something else without the use of like or as, because as you remember from ninth grade reading class or English class, like and as are used as similes or used in similes, which is obviously not a metaphor. And below are some examples. For example, Greg is a ticking time bomb, or time flies when you're having fun. I'm sure you've heard that one a lot. Or it's raining cats and dogs. In many instances, what I've come to learn in my research is that a lot of idioms are actually metaphors. However, that doesn't go the other way, or doesn't go the opposite way. Not all metaphors are idioms. For young or second language learners, this obviously can be super difficult. It's a process of creating a metaphor because it is a very advanced language skill and it's an advanced process. This is obviously so for multiple reasons, because it is one, abstract language. It's figurative language that is using vocabulary in a complexity that is not in a literal sense. It's advanced concept of vocabulary and word recognition as well. And it's also the use of word order and sentence order. Comprehension of higher order grammar such as prepositions and gerunds and modals, just to name a few. And of course, all of this semester we've kind of been focusing on these things for second language learners, and it's already tough for them to learn these things and using them in literal sense or literal vocabulary-esque examples. So to use metaphors is a little bit more obviously advanced in skill. So where do metaphors appear? So there are several mediums. There's obviously speech metaphors or oral metaphors that you speak, written metaphors that you see obviously in text, in poems, in newspapers, wherever. And there are visual metaphors as well that you see in advertisements and photos and campaign shoots and whatever it is that maybe businesses or products are trying to sell. Those kind of metaphors can appear visually or in pictures. There are with two types. There's abstract and there's literal. A study done by Pawlowski et al., if I mispronounced that, in 2013, suggested that young learners grasp more literal examples of speech in advertisements than abstract metaphors or concepts. This is obviously pretty much on par with how literacy skills develop, where young learners and emergent learners learn to understand language in the very literal sense and in a very literal cognition, because how you take in and process information is how they see as surface, or what it is surface value. Creating those abstract, complex, understandings builds with age and builds with obviously experience with a language and experimenting themselves with a language. Metaphors can be taught, but they are learned mostly through experience and conversation between speech exchanges from peers or from instructors or from role models or from parents, and through media outlets in both print or visual settings. So obviously in a lot of media that we consume, and especially for younger audiences using technology, there are a lot of different instances of advertisements in the technological sense, in visual aspects, and that display different ideas and different meanings than what we older generations were kind of exposed to. So how can metaphors support status quo norms? And if you aren't familiar with what status quo means, it's basically what the norms are, what society feels like is normal and acceptable. This first bullet, teachers are in need of a language that enables them to clarify meaning in the midst of complexity. We are at the head of the class. We are what the teacher or the students look to for guidance. It is important that as teachers we do our best to lead by example, and not only what we do, but and obviously what we say, because it does have just as much of an impact on our students, because we are communicating with them. That's how we show and understand and teach them. And for example, how this kind of supports status quo norms in the sense that having a really good job profession, and with job security, it means success and it means that you are doing well. Like here it says doctors and lawyers bring the most to the table. Well, these similar metaphorical phrases that suggest that certain career paths are the only roads to success is limiting students to the options and to the reality that people can do other jobs and other occupations and be successful and have the same, opportunities in life than those who are doctors and lawyers. That it also devalues students whose parents do not work in these occupations. It almost makes it like an elitism between what professions are the best and what professions aren't, and if there's an intellectual inferiority between them. And some of these metaphors comparing looks to smartness limit students to specific boxes of what being smart should look or appear like. So the metaphor of head over heels kind of takes on a whole new meaning whenever you think of it in that context. How metaphors can be culturally insensitive. The following that I have here are pretty culturally insensitive. Off the reservation, I'm sure you probably have heard wetback, wife beater, drink the Kool-Aid, he's not the sharpest knife in the toolbox. These are all kind of used in the sense of negative connotations, or to demean some other party or person in the situation or the context that you're speaking of. So here it's whether some of these insensitive qualities are usually generalizations or kind of stabs. So obviously off the reservation connotate to someone who is out of touch, but this obviously promotes that Native American culture, people who obviously identify with that culture, is obsolete, and that their way of life is more outsiders and more strange or not acceptable than those who live in the city or who are identified with different racial or ethnic identifiers. I'm sure you probably have heard this one, drink or drinking the Kool-Aid. It promotes conformity in a really extreme way. I know if you went to A&M, like me, that you probably get that a lot. But I did read in this book that called Culture's the Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell, that this actually has a huge generational gap in meaning, where we as younger generations kind of use it on the offhand just to kind of either be funny or to use it to kind of describe somebody who's a fanatic of something or really supportive of something. For older generations, it's a little bit more atrocious in the sense that it kind of reminds them of the atrocities that happened that coined this term in the first place. So it's very kind of generationally impacted. So obviously wetback, wife beater, those are both derogatory terms. I don't really need to have to go into that. It just describes people or behavior of people based on clothing. The last refers obviously to intelligence, and it can be a harmful generalization to somebody, or it can also be kind of a pointed or points out somebody's inability, which is obviously not what we want to do. All of these things are obviously used in media and other social outlets, and students may bring these in with them to the classroom. So it is important to teach students ways to identify how these metaphors can be harmful, not only to them, but to their peers and their learning, and to us as teachers, because these all affect everybody who is involved and in their immediate environments. So how metaphors can promote student success in the classroom. Obviously, with negatives comes positives. Metaphors take on a huge role in creation of meaning for students. Metaphors enable one to describe the discrepancies between the expected and the experience. It uses reflection to use expressions reflecting the experience of multiple meanings or values in a situation. And 3, creating new understandings in a given situation. Instructors can choose to have inspiring metaphors because together we can build a road to success, or remind them that we have just scratched the surface of possibilities, inspiring a love of learning in these figurative forms of speech, because we can use these as imagery and allegory for motivation, and for students to kind of visualize and see these different things, and also be familiar with positive metaphor formatting rather than negative ones. Referring to your students as individuals allows educators to avoid generalizations of student populations and encourages similar behavior or attitudes in your student populations. So why is this important for teachers to adapt, or adopt, excuse me? There is a connection between the metaphors that teachers employ and that their beliefs about teaching and classroom practices by Godor. It is important for us to remain as unbiased as possible. Abusing metaphors can permit unsavory attitudes, and unreachable expectations, or limited mindsets of achievement, obviously, as we've seen before. We can equip students with the knowledge and awareness of harmful metaphors, so that way they know how to identify these things and either be able to identify them and deconstruct them, or identify them and voice why these are bad. We are exposing students to different methods of expressions while challenging them to use that higher order literacy processes, and increases obviously vocabulary knowledge and complexity by diving in more of what vocabulary is and how words that they already know can be used in different contexts, and increases fluidity in a language. In traditional settings, obviously what we teach is truth, and what a lot of students hear what we say put trust in our words and our practices. So it's important to be mindful of what we're saying to them and what we're teaching. All right, let's move on. So let's look at some activities to consider in the classroom. So obviously for young audiences, it's going to be a little bit different. We're probably going to have to introduce this concept to them in the first place. So conducting a workshop to explain and introduce what metaphors are, how we use them, how we employ them, where they are in our environments, in our text, in our advertisements, in our technology. The list goes on, but it can help students create metaphors, and this especially is good for obviously young audiences, and we can emphasize the differences between metaphors and similes, because those are pretty identifiable and being different in what they are and how they are constructed. So vocabulary exercises, because vocabulary is so important in creating a good metaphor and realizing what kind of words to use and how to use them and put them all together to make a very lasting metaphor. Act out literal metaphors, like it's raining cats and dogs. That's not a literal one, but it would be funny to try and act that out, and it would be more inclusive and interactive, rather than just trying to write it out and students reading it. Graphic organizers are always a nice way to go. For older audiences, select advertisements and ask students what metaphors they gather from the text. Ask them what their opinion is, what they think a metaphor is, and kind of redirect whenever what they're, depending on their answers. Shout out as many metaphors in a minute. And I saw this one and I was like, well, that was just kind of fun just to see what they think is a metaphor and what they might culturally bring to the table as metaphors. Looking at new metaphors, predicting what they are, search and define and use them in a sentence, because some people who have cultural differences might bring some from their culture that are not normal in English. Warm-up exercises obviously use 5 new metaphors in a short story. This helps with writing and obviously reading literacy and development, and then bring a metaphor to class and then explain it. So why it's important to have these. And well, the important points to remember of this presentation are: make your metaphors inspiring and inclusive. One tip, which I have noticed, be gender neutral, because partner up, grab up, because students nowadays have so many different identifiers, and we may not be aware of what we say may be offensive to them or to somebody else. Use the metaphors to generate acceptance. Redirect and explain, educate demeaning ones or insensitive metaphorical language. Break metaphors down into smaller localized activities. Do not use metaphors to generalize or summarize a group of students in ability or learning. And remember that metaphors are used in different literacy techniques and grammar structures. It's an advanced level of language. But lastly, remember to have fun with your students. Learning is not a linear road. It's okay to have ups and downs. So that is my presentation over metaphors in the classroom and why it's so important that we use them and know how to use them properly and teach our students that. Here are my references, and thank you so much for joining me today.